Welcome to our Zoom/Facebook Live weekly Q&A. I am so excited this week that Bonnie St. John is going to join us. She also skied on the U.S. It was the U.S. disabled team then, now the U.S. adaptive team. We did not overlap, but 1 silver, 2 bronze medals in 1984, and that was in Innsbruck, right?
Correct.
Well, you can tell us which events they were too. I
just said alpine. So slalom and giant slalom, I bronzed in, and then it was the silver for overall performance.
Oh, they had an overall. Okay.
They had an overall at the time, and they didn't have Super G. So we had downhill slalom and giant slalom.
Okay, perfect. And then, and also academically, very accomplished, magna cum laude from Harvard, had a Rhodes Scholarship, studied in Oxford, worked in the Clinton White House as the director of National Economic Development. Is that right?
It was the National Economic Council, and so it was for coordinating across the country about keeping the economy strong. So efforts to keep the economy strong,
which is a fairly big deal when you are the president,
which we need more of now.
Yes, we're
really. It's tough. I don't want to joke about it. It's a very tough time.
No, it's a very tough, and it's an unprecedented time right now. I mean, with 1 out of every 4 working age adults out of work, and growing deficit, and big questions about where we're going to end up. Yeah. And no idea where we're going to go. But you also, most recently, you've written 7 books, right? And the 7th one is Micro Resilience, which is what we're going to talk about. We at One Revolution are so much about resilience. So our motto is, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. And so it really is about resilience, but you are talking about the resilience really in the moment. You know, this micro resilience, and it's something. It's kind of funny because I think that we talk about similar kinds of things. And for me, I often talk about the idea of winning that moment and realizing possible. Which to me, realizing possible is having a big goal, but realizing possible in the moment when everything gets difficult. But can you tell us what micro resilience is all about, and why we should all know it, and why people should pick up your book?
Well, we coined the term micro resilience and then coined the term macro resilience to create that contrast. And it was because a lot of the research about resilience is about the things you have to do habitually: get enough sleep, exercise regularly, eat right, do yoga, have all of these good habits, and it keeps you strong and resilient and able to bounce back from things. The other thing that's typical about the way the research talks about resilience is they talk about being sort of down and out. It's like if you imagine an average, a line of average, you're below average and you're trying to get back to normal, right? So with micro resilience, we wanted to talk about tiny things you can do, not things you had to do over and over again, but a little thing that would have an immediate effect. And we were aiming really at helping people, not who were down and out, but at the top of their game. So when I was at the Paralympics in the slalom, I came out of the first run in first place, but in the second run, I fell. Yeah, you know the story, Chris. I fell and I got up and I finished anyway. And I thought, oh, it's over. I'm not in contention for a medal. I still ended up winning third and getting the bronze in that race. And what had happened is a lot of women fell in the race, and I got back up and I finished. Now, the woman who beat me, she couldn't beat me skiing. I had when nothing went wrong, I had the fastest slalom time in the world, but clearly she got up faster than I did because she also fell in the second run. There was this really dangerous icy spot. We both had one leg. She also fell and got up. And so she just got up faster than I did. So this concept of being resilient, not just when you're down and out, or we talk about alcoholism or substance abuse, or being abused as children, but when you're even at the top of your game, having that resilience to be able to get that extra edge. So resilience at the top of your game, and resilience in the moment is more what we focused on with the research. And we started this in 2011 and did a lot of research, looked at neuroscience, positive psychology, physiology, all kinds of things.
Which is awesome. And the thing is, it's funny that you talk about that you bring skiing in, because that's obviously part of what we share. I tell anybody who will listen that it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. It came from being a ski racer. It didn't come from, because the assumption is, oh, well, this is as a result of being in a wheelchair and you had to figure stuff out. And it's like, no, there's no such thing as a perfect run. It's generally the person who recovers most quickly. And but you're talking a bit more of a mindset though too. I mean, it really is committing to a mindset, and sometimes even little tricks. And I mean, I think that in a lot of ways it's a matter of sort of being aware of the problem or the potential problem. I am going to be nervous here. This really matters a lot. I'm going to be nervous, and I can be completely dominated by my nerves. Or I can be in a position where I go, okay, I know that I am going to be nervous. And what can be my strategy to try to deal with those nerves? I mean, even in the beginning of the book, you talk about you have the illustration about the tennis players, that the most successful tennis players are the ones who can lower their heart rate in between sets. So it's not what they're doing while they're playing, but it's giving themselves the best opportunity.
And lowering their heart rate is just one of the things they do between the points. So that was sort of how we ended up arriving at the focus on micro things, is the top tennis players in between volleys had ways of increasing their focus, drive, and energy. And so one of the things the researchers noticed is that they could get their heart rate back to the optimal level, but it was also they had positive self-talk. They didn't get distracted by the crowds. There was a number of things they did to keep up their focus, drive, and energy. Because if you lose a point and something goes wrong, you can be distracted by that and you're not thinking about the next point. But even if you won a point, you could be distracted by I won the point, and you're not thinking about the next point. So being able to really pivot and get to your best play in the next volley is these micro tips. And that's what got us started thinking about that. And then that's what the tennis players were doing. But we were interested in, what do you do if you're working in an insurance company or a bank or a healthcare company? What is the equivalent of being able to regain that energy between the points so that you can be less exhausted? And in today's world, when so many people are quarantining, we're dealing with crazy news stories, how do we not let that drain us, drain our energy, drain our enthusiasm and everything? So there's a lot of research in the micro-resilience frameworks that we did. And so looking at, how do we help our brain to function better? And so brain fatigue is very real. Judges and doctors, there have been studies showing how much your decisions can deteriorate when you get hungry, when you get tired, And so being aware of that is, how do you help yourself to refresh your decision-making capacity, put your most important meetings or your most important decisions at a time of day when either you're fresh or you can be refreshed, so that you're really giving it your best. And exercise, as athletes, we both can be interested in the idea that exercise can help your brain perform better. It's not just to make you strong, but it also helps your brain perform better.
It does, but sub-maximal.
Right, not pushing yourself to the absolute end. Yeah, when you run a marathon, by the end of the marathon, your brain's probably not working that well. But as little as 15 minutes of walking on a treadmill or dancing or something like that can help you to make better decisions, to remember things better, to make inferences better. And what's interesting, one of the studies that measured it doesn't matter if you walk outside or you walk on a treadmill. So I got a treadmill desk because I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to make my brain perform better. I'm going to do that.
Which is awesome. It's funny though too, because I think that in some ways there are two sides of it, right? And looking at it on the athlete side. So I'm from Massachusetts, so I'm a Red Sox fan. I mean, this is the way these things go. And one of our players a few years ago, this guy Manny Ramirez, was this amazing hitter, but he was a guy who in some ways looked like he didn't even care, and I think that in some ways some of the public would sort of condemn him as sort of almost being like this idiot savant, like he just went up there and he just hit. But it's actually it's a genius that if you can miss one pitch and go, I don't really care, I'm not emotionally connected, I'm not emotionally destroyed by missing this pitch, I'm okay. You're much more prepared for that next pitch. And it's a real challenge, I think, also for all of us, just because we put so much stock in, if it's difficult, that means it's more worthwhile. If we really had to work for it,
I see what you're saying.
The sacrifices that we had to. Whereas I
But
think a lot of what you're.
Because sometimes it depends on your personality, but my personality is I can tend to overthink things. So to get to that place of peace that you're describing actually takes a little bit of work and preparation and good habit building to stay that peaceful, right? So maybe some people come at it naturally, but are you somebody who just is naturally a peaceful Zen-like person, Chris?
I think that I have to actually, no, this is something I've really had to think about a lot. It's been a real challenge for me. I mean, you talk about like the start of a ski race. The start of a ski race, I went a year and a half without finishing a ski race because I was so consumed by nerves. And
you were crashing. You were crashing in all your races.
Crashing
Oh,
all of my.
gosh.
And this is prior to my accident. And really by 15 years old, I just wanted to quit. I didn't want to, I couldn't see moving forward because it just wasn't enjoyable. Each race was an opportunity to fail. And then having to take that step back and then try to learn and apply a lot of these things. And for me, in a lot of ways, after my accident was probably the most powerful that I've ever been. And it was a matter of mastering myself and knowing that things would go wrong, but that was my job. The game really wasn't like, you look at the competition and you say, okay, well, did you win or lose? And a lot of the competition is happening before you even start. Are you winning that contest with yourself? And so that was a huge challenge for me. So no, I'm not intuitive. I think I've learned a lot of these things the hard way. And so in reading your book, I was like, okay, yep, oh no, I totally understand. And between that and Donna, who I think you can see on the screen here, Pathways to Empower, started this the Nametags program with me and is doing a lot of work with neuroscience as well, and brain pathways and various things like that. And so between what I've learned on my own and then what I've heard from Donna, I was like, okay, we've got a lot of good stuff going on here. So Donna, do you have any questions that you might want to ask Debani?
First off, I have to say I apologize for being a little bit late. We were having a family dinner and then I couldn't get on the internet. So I was a little bit like I was rushing on going, no. But I think the work that you're doing is amazing. And I love the micro resilience. I started off in terms of focusing in on how do we build resilience and then moved kind of to mental health. And it's funny because as you talking about creating those habits ahead of time is so important, because in the model that we work with, we talk about the two parts of the brain. There's the limbic system. There's the one's in charge of our short term and is the emotional brain, and one is the long-term decisions that is the more logical brain. And we have a character in the model that is a dragonfly that represents mindfulness and understanding what's happening in the moment, to be able to override the switch over to the emotional brain. So if you think about those tennis players, and they have to train that. That's mindfulness training, right, is actually creating that ability to do that. And then if we can teach people the things that make the brain healthy and help them to be able to do that stuff, it can be so powerful. So I love that. I love the micro, that this is for anyone. It's not just being down and out. I say our resilience is our response to any challenge.
Absolutely. And if you're at the top of your game, or you're good, or you're highly skilled at what you do, it can give you an extra edge. It just helps you to play your A game more of the time. When we wrote the book, we took about 30 different people, gave them the training, and then observed them for a few months. So we had been doing, prior to that, we had been using these tools and honing them with groups in corporate America, but to actually follow individual people for months at a time was really fun. And we did that for the book. And what we saw was that it helped them not only in their work, but it helped them in their personal life, to be less exhausted all the time. And what I loved, somebody said, some programs try to change you or make you into something else, but by using these little hacks in these 5 different areas, you help me just be more me. I'm more the me that I want to be. A lot of times when you get an amygdala hijack, so you're hijacked, your fight or flight systems, your brain is putting you into panic mode, you do things that you regret later, and you're not working with your higher order thinking. You're not drawing on all your experience and everything you've learned. You're just in panic mode, and you often do things that you regret. So being able to understand how these things work and flip that switch in the moment is so powerful. You can be in a business meeting and somebody disagrees with something you say, or steals your idea. This happens to women a lot, right? In corporate America, is there's a meeting and they say something, and then 10 minutes later, a guy says it and they go, hey, great idea, And so instead of getting really frustrated by that, being able to pull the conversation back around and restate your idea and get back in the game without blowing your top is crucial. Actually, it's interesting, because of what's going on in the world right now, we're dealing with so much racial divisiveness and things that are going on. And that's another example where whichever side of this you're on, there's so many problems. We could pick a problem, and whichever side of that problem you're on, it's so easy to lose your cool and then do something you regret. And so these skills to be able to help people talk themselves down and recognize when they're in fight or flight mode are important for such a time as this too.
Very important. And right now, it's so much of what is happening is predictable because of if you know the brain science, you know what's going on, and trying to help people understand why this is happening, how this is happening. And one of the things I was pointing to is there was a picture of policemen kneeling down with protesters. In that moment, what that did to the brain, like comparing and contrasting some of the other situations, and we won't necessarily get into politics here, but just, and then the moment of kneeling down, what that says.
I loved the image of the Denver police chief too, linking arms with the protesters too, and really creating more positivity. And as you say, there's a lot of different sides to a lot of different issues of what's going on. But it is important for each one of us to try to bring out the best in ourselves and others, so that we can get to a good place, so we can lead this to a good place.
You guys have to do it then with me.
I think one of the things is, and this is, I guess this has been my thing for a long time, is that if we could teach people the brain science, if everybody understood the language and understood the brain science, we'd be in a lot better place.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Oh no, can we just go back just a little bit, because you talked about hijacking the limbic system, right? And the thing is that, as I understood it, and tell me if I'm wrong, what you're effectively doing is you're bypassing your decision-making capabilities, right? That you're going straight to that reaction, as opposed to having the opportunity to make a decision or to make a rational decision. So you have to be cognizant.
And the reason why our brains do that is it was a survival mechanism. I mean, I live in a rural area now. And so if I'm driving down the road and a deer jumps out, you have to react quickly. Right. And, often I do react before I even make a decision, and I avoid that deer. And that's a good thing. That's what that's for. But when you're with people in an office and somebody, I gave the example of stealing your idea, or if you're out on the street and you're scared and things that are happening and there's a demonstration or there's tear gas, your body is, your brain is trying to help you by getting you to react before you can think. And so when we recognize that's what's happening and it's not helpful, we can slow it down. Actually, my teenage daughter says, slow your roll. And that means something different to you, doesn't it, Chris? Slow your roll.
Exactly.
But being able to take a deep breath. Go ahead, Donna.
So the model that we have of the brain, I have different characters that represent the different parts of the brain. And the ant represents the cortex, or the long-term decisions, the slow thinking. The grasshopper represents the limbic system, which is the fight, flight, or freeze. And the glowworm represents the amygdala. So the glowworm's job is to call out, switch control of the brain. And the dragonfly is in charge of the override, is in charge of saying, no, we got this. And she's got the 4 S's of resilience that we use in the Nametags program on her wings, that when we have those in place, we can override. We can say, no, we got this. And I always say fight, flight, or freeze roughly translates to violence, anxiety, and depression. So the opposite of those is action. We have something that we can do.
And is the name tags about putting labels on what you're feeling? Or, because I know that's that's a piece of research that we cite in our book. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure. No, I can answer that, or Donna could, but I'll take it. So name tags is about the labels that we put on ourselves and others, which are often our limitations. I can't do this because I'm too busy, I'm too tired, I'm too poor, I'm too, whatever it is. And this gets to some of your scheduling, your strategic way, your doctor who decided he wanted to write a play and trying to find the time and these kinds of things, So I think that ultimately, that's what our name tags thing is about, is that, it's really easy to have excuses, but it's much more beneficial to have strategies. So
right.
So
if I can give, so we've been talking about the brain research. So if I can just talk about this in a slightly different way. So I'll call it labeling, because it's different than what we're saying about name tags. So this is completely different than name tags. But there was research out of UCLA that says when we put words, when we describe our feelings with words, we can slow the hijack. So we were talking about how your brain can get hijacked. You're not really thinking from your highest order place when you're dealing with some of these things that push our buttons. But if you can put a label on what you're feeling, it can slow you down and put you back into your higher order thinking. So the research out of UCLA, Matt Lieberson, showed that we can do that. And so it sort of cools down your limbic system and helps you to have a better reaction to things. And so there's putting a label on, I'm in a meeting and I'm feeling disrespected, or I have a client that got angry and got on the phone and yelled at me, and I'm feeling attacked. So those are the kind of things that can trigger our fight or flight response. And so, but if you can just put a label on it and recognize what you're feeling, it can help you to slow that down. Now, another thing you can do is as you slow it down, you get a chance to breathe and you label it, you start using your rational brain, you can also start to choose and say, you know what, I'm feeling attacked, but what I can do is feel constructive and try to build a bridge with the other person. So once you're able to sort of label what you're doing, you can separate yourself from it. Instead of getting lost in that feeling and pulled along, you can make a decision to react in a different way.
Exactly. The rational part. And it's interesting that you talk about the labeling as well, because you and I have both seen a different kind of labeling.
Right, exactly. So name tags is great for talking about stereotypes as labeling, but this is the research out of UCLA that's just trying to talk about how we can use words to describe what's going on in our brain, and that can help us to get our rational approach, to strengthen our more rational approach when that's what we need to do and that's what we want to do. If you're trying to run from a fire, you don't need this. You need to run.
Exactly. Self-preservation.
But if you're trying to work with other people and avoid getting sucked into, these heightened emotions that we're seeing and being offended and attacking and defending, then there's no cooperation. There's no room for cooperation there.
Exactly. Go ahead,
Sorry,
Bella.
Chris. One of the
Go.
things, we've been doing a quick guide each week to helping people foster mental health. And the one that we did this week was on the social threats to the brain and why do we react. And I'm happy to share that with you. But because our brains respond, there is no difference in terms of social threat and physical threat. And I think people are always shocked at that the brain doesn't distinguish between social and physical threat. So when you have that social threat, it's pain, it's real.
They say that's because, in a primitive world, we needed each other to survive. You couldn't survive alone. And so a social threat, if you were going to get outcast from the group and be all on your own, you didn't have a cave, as a caveman, you're not going to survive. And so, yeah, we need each other. And so it's deeply embedded in our primitive brain that's part of our survival, is to be able to connect with the family, with the group, with society. And so, yeah, there's a very primitive threat. It's really interesting. There's some research that says we experience, the sounds of footsteps behind us on a dark road as, the same as somebody coming to you in the corporate world and saying, I want to give you some feedback. And that, the physical safety and the social safety, it registers in a very primitive way for us.
And one of the biggest threats in a lot of ways, and you and I have seen this, is change. And it's something I think we'll get to some of what's going on as well. But sort of growing up, I mean, for you, 5 years old, for me, 20 years old, coming into the disability world and trying to affect the change, trying to be seen as an individual. And I've always thought that the change can happen in 4 different ways, that it's sort of like litigation, legislation, protest. We're seeing a bit of that right now. But then the one that I'm trying to be a part of is demonstration, is trying to fill a void left by assumption with story, with an image that hopefully brings us together in a way that we recognize that it's a common path as opposed to being different. And I think that one of the big reasons for trying to do that is that I don't want to make people wrong. Because when you tell somebody that they're wrong, even if they recognize that you have a point, they harbor resentment.
Or they want to dig in and defend. You're triggering their defenses, right? Yeah.
Because they're defending their situation. So how, one, in a personal way, how have you been able to sort of help other people beyond what they think they see in you?
I think one of the things we do with resilience, it's interesting. So you listed different ways to change, right? You said legislation. What were the other ones?
Legislation, litigation, protest, and I think demonstration.
Modeling.
These are my 4 things. So whether they're right or not?
I think they're all right. But I guess when I think about how I work with people, I would say it's a 5th one.
Okay.
And it's really about leadership. And so I work with a lot of leaders in corporate America. And so they are modeling. Modeling is part of leading, but it's also about creating the conditions for other people to solve their problems in a different way. So if you are a leader in an organization, and it could be, a leader of a team of 5 people, or it could be a team of 5,000 people, right. You have the scope to change the dynamic. And so they don't need legislation. They don't need, that you are able to lead that environment. And so we talk a lot about the micro resilience with teams and how can you lead your team so that people are doing this. And so we not only deal with the brain science, we've been talking a lot about the brain science, but also about a sense of purpose and your team thinking about what is your sense of purpose and how can you draw on that to shift the dynamic. You can talk about we talk about a first aid kit. This is one of the fun ideas in the book is having a first aid kit for your attitude. And so if you, and actually there's a TED talk that I did that reaches this. So if you wanted to do this with your team, you could look up Bonnie St. John TED talk on first aid kit for your attitude and show that with your team. And then you could all put together first aid kits, and it allows you to help each other. Because if you're having a bad day, a client yells at you, or the contract, they cut off the contract and you lose your deal, or, something goes wrong. That can make it hard for you to have a good attitude and go into the next deal that you have to work on, or the next meeting that you have to work on. And so we talk about having a first aid kit that you can put in your drawer, put on your desk, where you can take something out to help you think about what's really important, what's really meaningful. In my first aid kit, one of the things I have is a note from my mother. My mother passed away 15 years ago, but she was a dynamic leader. She not only wrote a PhD thesis, there were two PhD theses written about her as a leader. And so when I look at this note from my mother, and it just says, cherish yourself, it helps remind me of what's really important, and to take the time to take care of myself and to lead others in a constructive way, as she did, to follow her example. So having mementos that can just, again, slow your roll, slow you down enough to not get hijacked by something that's happening in the moment, but to be able to pivot towards more positivity in the situation. And by doing that as a team, so if you're a leader and you have a team and you say, hey, we're going to all create each of our own first aid kits for our attitude, and think about what we can put in there that's going to help us shift our attitude in the moment. If we all do that, then we can help each other. Because if you're having a bad day, you may not think, oh, I'm going to go to my first aid kit. You may be, I've been there, you're having such a bad day, you're not thinking about changing it. And so being able to help each other. And, I've seen this where somebody will come to me and say, Bonnie, I'm looking at your face, you're looking kind of upset here, here's a positive note, or here's a positive poem you can read. So being able to help each other pivot in the moment and stay strong with our attitude, with our sense of purpose, all of those things.
Yeah. How do you, okay. So, that certainly is with regard to yourself and your own performance. But when you as a person are falling on deaf ears, how do you reach an audience that is not willing to see or hear you?
Well, where I was starting was not just what you do as an individual. I'm saying you can do this as a team, but it's first of all, I'm talking about a group of people who are committed to doing something together. You're on a sales team, or you're on a customer service team, you're responsible for delivering something. So you have a commitment to each other and presumably share some values. And you also can set things up like, hey, we can all have a first aid kit for our attitude. And you do that not in the moment. You don't dig your well when you're thirsty, right? So you're planning before that happens. So there's a lot of conditions where we can help each other. We can be strong. We can be committed to what we're doing, and we can do that. You're saying, though, in the hardest situation, when you're on the street and somebody's screaming at you, what do? That may not be the time that you can affect that change. That may not be the time when you're going to say, hey, let's have a first aid kit for your attitude. I'm not sure that's going to work when somebody's throwing rocks,
No, but if you're, being a woman in business, for me, being a guy in a wheelchair, there are different things that I think that there's situations where people will have a tendency to diminish who they think you are. And that's sort of the thing that I'm looking at right now. How do we create that conversation that tries to bridge that gap? Because
there was a piece of research that I saw, and it actually affirmed something that I have felt in practice. And now I do it even more intentionally since I saw the research. And it says, if you tell somebody what they're doing wrong, they feel like you're making them wrong. You're making them a bad person. Sure. So the research shows that if you affirm the other person first, that I know you're a good person, but here's this behavior that you have, that lands very differently than if they feel like you are criticizing them as a whole person. Do you understand? Am I making sense with the difference?
No, that makes perfect sense.
So the affirming somebody's good intentions or well-being first, and then talking about something they can shift in their behavior is very different. And it goes back to the brain science we've been talking about. It can calm their amygdala hijack, right? I'm not attacking you. I believe in you. I believe you're a great person. I was at a speech somewhere, and somebody came up to me and said, and I get this a lot, they said something like, "You're not really Black. You're not like other Black people. You're great," which is actually an insult. I know it's actually an insult, but they don't mean it, and they don't think they're saying that. Or somebody came to me and said, you don't act like, I'm trying to think of other examples, but you get what I'm saying. And so the response I gave that person, I knew they were trying to give me a compliment. I knew they were trying to say something nice to me. And so I said that. And I said, and this person was a coach at a college. And I said, you're a great coach. And I've seen the way you talk to your athletes. And I know you're trying to give me a compliment, but I just want you to know that telling me I'm not really Black isn't really a compliment. And telling me that I don't act Black isn't really a compliment. And I may not act the way your stereotypes think that a Black person should act, but that's not the same thing. And we get that with disability too, right? People say, well, you're not really disabled. And I said, well, actually, I challenge your ideas of what a disabled person is like, but I claim the title of being disabled. But we are many, we are complicated, So being able to affirm somebody's good intentions and good values before saying, but by the way, I want you to understand how this landed for me. That's very different than telling them, you just insulted me, or that's a terrible thing to say, That's not going to help that person make that change.
No.
Is that what you were looking for? Is that kind
No,
of what
I
you
think
were
that's more of what I was looking for, because I think it is one of the big challenges, is trying to figure out how we can bridge that gap, how we can try to affect the change and speak for ourselves without being contentious, without being confrontational, so that it becomes a war, and
I think a lot of times too, when there was a saying, when hurt people, right? Is
Sure.
that when you feel hurt and attacked, it's really easy to hurt and attack in return. So when that person said to me, well, you're not really Black, I could have been upset and I could have said something back. But if I can stay calm and invite that person in to collaborate and affirm that person, I can help them see it from my point of view. And that's a whole different discussion than if I feel attacked and I attack back.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, and it puts a fair amount of the onus on the person who potentially is being insulted. I mean, you can be insulted by somebody saying, you're not really Black, and you're like, okay, so I have free reign to just completely unload on you. I mean, I do have to. It's really actually kind of funny that you said that, and you went to Harvard, and so you have to remember, because Ali G spoke at commencement at Harvard. Have you seen this?
I have not seen it.
So Sacha Baron Cohen spoke as Ali G. And one of the things he said, you guys have lived a relatively sheltered life here. You've gone to Harvard. Many of you may not have seen a Black man before. And now you have. And part of the funny part was that Ali G, and Sacha Baron Cohen is not Black either. He was playing this. So it was, but I think that's where these things in some ways can be funny, but then also can be so can create such an injury. And I think it's some of where we are right now as well, with regard to George Floyd, and with regard to some of the protests and these kinds of things where people are becoming so entrenched.
Well, there's so much pain. There is so much pain that it's really hard not to respond when you're feeling pain, not to respond with anger and counterattack. When you feel attacked, you defend, you counterattack, and then the other person feels attacked. And we were talking earlier about the brain science. So when somebody's hurling, and I'm not talking about physical, so let's not talk about physical for a moment, but when somebody is just getting insults hurled at them, they feel attacked and they're triggered to fight or flight, and then they're going to say something attacking or insulting back or angry, and then the other person feels hijacked, and then neither one of them are dealing with their full brain resources, and so we get in very dangerous situations. And so being able to understand how to dial that back is important. And we talked about slowing down, taking a deep breath, using your mental resources, and putting labels on what you're feeling is important. Other simple things, this is going to sound crazy, but a simple way of de-escalating can be smells and sounds that are calming and can pull you back as well. And so being able to do that in the moment is really, really important.
One of the things,
sorry. Go ahead, Donna.
So the brain science in terms of that, in terms of the mindfulness, is switching off that default network. So paying attention to those smells or sounds, or like if you can bring yourself to the moment. And you were talking earlier about the first aid kit and having people around to help you. I think we use the idea of a trigger script, of being able to give a short script that the limbic system can understand and move, giving an action ahead of time. And I talk a lot about kids and about parenting but it can work in the workspace as well to have a plan ahead of time. But if you can use a word, if you can use something that people agree to be able to say, all right, because you can't be logical when you're in the limbic system. Having that ahead of time.
Right. And we're seeing that in crowds and on the street. There's a lot of people who are not really accessing a lot of their logical resources, and that can get really dangerous really fast as well. So being able to pull yourself back and help pull others.
I think also that we're right now, so many people are in their limbic system from fear of COVID, from being isolated.
We've got the fear of the disease at the same time as a lot of fear of each other, fear of differences, fear of others, fear of losing my job, just
job, my house, my life.
So it's a lot. It's a lot to be able to deal with. And so we really have a tinderbox. And I think if more of us who are listening can be the change, can be the ones that take the deep breath, that step back, that try to diffuse these situations, I think, it's so needed right now. And you had said, and I do want to be careful, because I think trying to say, I'm going to use these brain science tools when people are throwing bricks on the street, probably not the time. Right. And so you need to be conscious of being safe and doing things that are safe. But I'm thinking more about if you're at work and some of these issues come up, and it can be a flashpoint in your discussion with your team, that people can get angry and people can see things different ways. And so being able to help people take a breath, calm down, and see different points of view is really important.
No, it's having the plan ahead of time, not necessarily when you're going into a crowd of people that you don't know. That I agree with you, having that plan ahead of time, and also having people understand that because right now our limbic systems are so triggered, it's more important than ever to balance out the part of the brain and keep healthy the part of the brain that is in charge of those long-term decisions. So you had talked about, the way we eat, the way we socialize, the way, so many things that we can do to keep that part of the brain healthy so that we can access it.
Yeah. So we divide it into micro resilience and macro resilience too. And macro resilience is really important. And that is to get enough sleep, eat right, meditate, do yoga, whatever it is that helps you stay peaceful and grounded. All those things that are really important. And for Chris and I, exercise on a regular basis, and that's going to help keep you sane. But in micro resilience, so here I'll show a copy of the book. In micro resilience, we do talk about the tiny little things that you can do in the moment to help you pivot. And it's good to learn those things ahead of time and practice those things, but you can do them in the moment. And so we're both talking about a lot of brain things, but there's other things too that are more rooted in purpose, or even making sure in the moment that your blood sugar level is even, that you're getting enough hydration. Things like that also help too, to make it easier to stay in your best performance. So it's your brain, it's your physiology, it's your sense of purpose and meaning. All of those things come together to help you stay rooted in who you really want to be, not who you get hijacked to be. Yeah.
Exactly. I saw, and we'll open it up to questions for everybody else too, because we've completely monopolized this. I saw a thing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he said that, said, well, what can you do? What can we do? And I thought he had a nice point where he said, find somebody who's different from you. Have a conversation with somebody who is different from you. And obviously, that's a challenge for all of us in our regular lives when things aren't nearly as heated. We don't seek out people who are different from us. Do you have any other practical steps that practical recommendations that people might be able to take to help at least bridge that gap, because there is a fairly decent gulf between a lot of people?
Jamie and I, a friend of mine, we're talking about this, and it's challenging because so right now, people, if you're Black, we're experiencing a lot of threat from the police. That there's Black people are, and not all police. I mean, I think most police men and women are great people, but like any group, there's a few bad apples and things go wrong, and it doesn't go well. But how do we talk about that? And I think Jamie is a friend of mine who is white and I'm Black. And we were saying, as a white person, how can she be an ally? How can she help make conversations like this better? But it's hard to do, because sometimes you say something and you offend somebody, or you don't know what to say, or you don't know how to engage in that conversation. And so you just stay quiet. So if things are going badly wrong for Black people and all the white people are just staying quiet, that's not a good dynamic. And so that's a tough thing. And I don't think I have really easy answers, but to be an ally, it's not enough to just have empathy and speak up. That can be problematic. If you have empathy and you just speak up and say, hey, I believe it's this way, you could offend people, you could say the wrong thing, you could actually maybe cause more problems than you want. But if you just stay silent, that's a problem too. And so that's a real struggle. And I think one friend of mine said, you really have to have informed empathy. And so you want to have empathy. You don't want to just stay quiet, but the more you can inform yourself, so the more you're asking questions about what is that like for you? How can I help? What should I do differently? The more you're listening and asking and learning and maybe reading, that's great too. So empathy is great. Not staying silent is great, but getting more informed is a key part of that equation to keep it from going wrong. I would also say humility is a key part of it. And so we're talking about race right now, but we also see this dynamic with men and women, right? Sure. With women and men's issues. I was at a conference where there was a panel of men talking about women's leadership. How do women get ahead in corporate America? And, one guy said something that offended everybody. And another guy was saying more like, you know what? I want to be an ally, but it's up to the women to decide if I'm really a good ally. And so, here's what I think, here's what I can do, but you tell me if that's working. So it's a combination of courage and humility. So if you have no courage, you just stay quiet. That's not really going to cut it. But if you have a lot of courage and you jump in there and you say, I know how to save the world, if you're trying to help people if you're a man trying to help women, if you're white trying to help Black, if you're able-bodied trying to help people with disabilities, you need a little humility. So courage and humility combined, you can be a great ally. Is that helpful?
I think that's helpful, but it also sounds like you're saying that it's better to ask questions than it is
to learn and to
come
learn
with solutions.
Yeah, but over time, I think you can grow in your allyship and maybe have more solutions. But it's definitely a learning journey and a partnership.
Right. Because otherwise you're making assumptions, right? That I'm making the assumption, well, this is something that's good for women. And the women are going, you have no idea what
Wait,
you're talking
yeah.
about.
And the challenge is you don't know what you don't know, right?
That's
And
always the
so,
challenge, right?
yeah, yeah.
That reminds me, Chris, of how when you go to a hotel room, you ask specifically to not have a room.
Accessible room. Yeah.
That is.
Why I don't like the accessible rooms either. Why
Yeah.
don't you like them, Chris? What I got to hear this, Chris. Why don't you like the accessible rooms?
First of all, there are a variety of things. One, high toilets are not designed for me. I don't want to be any higher off the ground. I don't know how this happened. I don't know where it went. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to jack you up. And I'm like, why do I want to do that? That seems like a long way to fall.
I don't like the accessible showers.
Well, I hate the showers, and I'm often, if I like the bench seat, they just design them poorly, where the bench seat is like 6 feet away from the shower, which is away from the handle, that like the temperature control, and you're going, but I might want to change the temperature while I'm in the middle of this, and it also with a chair with a roll-in shower, it means that my chair the wheels are there's something dirty on my wheels. And then they get wet, just because you've gone through dust or dirt, you've been on the road. This is the way it works on the sidewalk. And so then you end up with tracks throughout your whole bathroom, your room, and all of this. And I'm like, it's just not convenient. And it's not convenient for me. That doesn't mean that that it's not convenient for everybody, but it's not convenient for me. And that's one of those assumptions that, yeah, I have to be proactive and say,
Yeah.
please don't give me that thing that you think you want to give me.
My disability
Right.
room that I want for my disability is I like a tub and not a shower. So I'm
Yeah.
missing one of my legs. So for me to stand up hopping around in a soapy shower is not necessarily the healthiest thing in the world. So I like a tub. I want to be able to sit down. And they're getting rid of tubs everywhere. Tubs are getting harder and harder to find.
Yes. Yeah, they
But all
are.
of this is moot now because we can't stay in hotels.
Right. No, I haven't been in a hotel in 3 or 4 months. So 3 months, something like that, whatever it is. I know it is. So can we open it up for some questions? Is there anybody that has any questions? Micro resilience, how we might approach our lives and our plans and differently, and be more of the person that we want to be in the most critical times. Anybody?
Are people speaking up, or are they putting questions in the chat?
They would speak up, and everybody is muted right now. So if you do want to ask a question, you have to take yourself off mute. And there we go. Jenny's, or at least we see Jenny now. Does that mean you're going to ask a question?
I do. Although I think this might have already been answered because, so that's my son. Hi.
Hi.
So on your website, one of your topics is beyond politically correct. And so, we already discussed about, what we can do right now in this, current situation. But is there anything else that, like a tool from that talk that, that we didn't cover?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, again, things are so intense right now. I'm not talking as much about beyond politically correct because it's almost like everybody's got to calm down before we can even get to that. But the point of that, I've done that as a workshop, like a 3-hour workshop, is politically correct can sometimes feel like a straitjacket. Like we have to do everything right. And it's a set of etiquette to avoid offending somebody else. And so everybody's being so careful. It's like you can't say anything. And what I find, and again, most of my experiences in corporate America working with leadership teams and things, is that people are going to offend each other. And a lot of those etiquette rules have been breaking down over the last few years, and they're just not followed as much. And so we needed tools not to avoid offending each other, but what do I do when we do offend each other? How do we handle that? So don't assume I'm never going to offend anybody. What do I do when it happens? And so the workshop that we give on Beyond Politically Correct talks about 5 steps to deal with what we call identity collisions. So when you run into each other, and it could be the first woman to get hired into to be a partner in a law firm, and she might, people might offend her by saying something about her being a woman, but then if she calls them out on it and says you're sexist, then they feel attacked too. And so again, we were touching on this a little bit earlier, but it's this idea that she could feel attacked and then they could feel attacked. And then everybody's got, their brain hijack going on, and what do you do? So the steps are, you do have to calm down. You have to slow your roll. You have to take a deep breath, or, do whatever it is to slow yourself down. And then instead of trying to explain why the other person is wrong, is to find that common ground and to show some respect for the other person and who they are and what are your common values. What do you have at stake together? And again, if you're out on the street with somebody, that may be much harder to do than if you work together on a team. You do have a reason to want to cooperate, a reason to want to be successful together. So slowing down, so your oxygen can come back into your brain, finding what's your common ground, and then also, explaining both points of view. So explaining a little bit about where you come from, why you think the way you do, and then trying to understand, asking questions about why does the other person have the point of view that they have, and then being able to brainstorm about solutions, about how can we make this better. And so you're bringing people into a discussion that is creative and generative as opposed to attacking. And I have to say, since I started doing this work, I really notice it when I see well-meaning people berating other people for doing it wrong. And that's the danger too of politically correct, is it can degenerate into not just a system of etiquette, but a system of berating people. You didn't do it right. You're politically incorrect. You insulted people. You did this, and just shaming people for making mistakes doesn't help them to get to a better place. So that's why we started doing the workshops on Beyond Politically Correct, is because we've gotten into such a territory where people are colliding. Their differences in identity and experience are colliding more than ever. And what we need is not just to avoid that, because we can't avoid it all, but how do you turn those collisions into an opportunity to grow and create better understanding? Did that answer your question? Sorry, it was kind of a long-winded answer.
No, it did.
I have a
And-
question.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, do you know that I'm here? Louise?
I do. I see you. Thank you, Louise.
I have a question because I don't know. I would like to have some clarification of what you're saying is a prejudice. Is it that you're Black, or is it that you're disabled, or is it that because,
or that I'm a woman? We can go all of them.
okay, or that you're a woman?
And you're not alone in that. We all have those, right?
Oh yeah, I get the woman thing. But like right now, what do you think is your biggest hurdle?
Out of those three things, out of being Black, disabled, or being a woman, what is the biggest hurdle? Is that the question?
Yeah, or how?
Or it doesn't even have to be one of those three. It's what is your biggest hurdle? Yeah.
Yeah, because I see Chris, I don't see Wheels. I see friends who are women. I have a lot of Black friends. I don't see their color. I'm probably a little bit different in that way, but I think people right now in this atmosphere are hypersensitive with the virus and with Floyd.
People are tired.
Yeah. They're tired. They're exhausted by everything, and I mean, it's not fair to try to defend your rights when everybody's they're so tired that they can't maybe even go outside which
Right.
I wasn't allowed. I live in Switzerland. I wasn't allowed to go outside for 2.5 months. And I mean, like outside. And I don't have a partner or a family. And so I'm like talking to the walls and going a little bit crazy. Though I was crazy before, that's fine. But in terms of the issues that you talked about, like you know, being a woman, being Black, and being in the United States and having an an injury, you know, how do you address that? What kind of support do you want from that? Because
Oh, I want to say one thing too. And again, this is a great example of obviously, oh, I'm sorry. I can't, go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't hear the last thing you said.
I don't see any of it. I don't see that Chris is disabled. I don't see that Chris is white. I don't see that you're Black. I don't see that you're, I guess, an amputee. I don't see any of that. And I'm quite sure that a lot of people see that. So
Well, I think,
how would you
again,
recommend addressing that?
I guess what one thing I want to say is, you're obviously a very positive person, and I appreciate you speaking up. But to say you don't see Chris's disability or you don't see that I'm Black is almost to say you don't see me. And so I'm not, and maybe I'm not understanding what you mean by that. Is maybe you just mean you don't see it as a negative. But to say you don't see it at all is like saying I don't see he's a man, or I don't see he's American. It's okay to see those differences and appreciate them, and not to try to be blind to the differences. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see it, but it doesn't influence me. You know, you go back to this hotel room, and Chris stayed with me in California years and years ago, and I got him a handicapped room, and then he goes, and
I don't really want that room. Yeah.
kind of don't need that room. Just climb Kilimanjaro. I'm like, okay, you know. So I mean, I was trying to be considerate, but for your friends or the people out there who are supporting you, you also have a job to teach us how to support your environment, your Blackness, your disabledness,
Or being a woman. Yeah.
or
How do
being
you, so we talked about, you're a woman. How do you help your male friends to be an ally for you as a woman? I mean, I don't know if you do you work in a big association?
I haven't done a very good job on that at all. I mean, maybe you can teach me. I've been married twice, and I love both my husbands very much. But I've been divorced twice, and I have 2 great sons from my first husband. And I think every relationship is challenging. You don't have to be disabled. You don't have to be Black. You don't have to be a woman. You don't have to be whatever. Like I emailed somebody yesterday who emailed me because now I'm in the States, and they said, "Did you get there?" And
I just want to say too, I think that what she's doing is very powerful, which is showing up, saying, I don't know, and being in the conversation and being willing to be humble. It's that humble courageousness that I talked about, right? It's just a courage to stand up, the courage to say, I don't know, and hey, how do I do this better? And so I do think that's modeling really good behavior for being able to find a new way of being. And so we could talk about 10 different situations, but whatever situation you find yourself in, if you can have that courageous humility to be able to say, you know what, in this kind of situation, I'm not sure what is the right thing to do. Can you help me find the right thing to do? You're going to get a lot further than by trying to just jump in and save people And that I think that's one of the challenges with the male-female dynamic too, is men are trained that they need to save us, right? Because you need to be strong, you need to be the hero. And so that's hard to have that kind of humility. It's interesting. Chris, would you say the same thing?
No, I would say the same thing. I think that sounds like a really good, it is interesting that you come from the humility side of it, because I think the humility is probably the first step in looking at all of these, right? Because the thing is that humility is probably the thing that you have to engage as the recipient of something where you feel like you've been slighted and you're thinking, okay, now I feel like I should be mad at somebody, but I need to take this and I need to pivot it and redirect in some ways to connect with this person. And so I think it's the humility, but I think it's also, I mean, you talk about humility, you talk about having a bigger purpose, talk about, and I think that part of it is sort of being open to this experience, being open to
and that's the courage. I think that's the courage too, right? Is not, humility doesn't just mean sitting back and being quiet and just letting everything go by. You've got to engage.
You've got to engage, and you've got to say, I'm on this journey, and there are no givens right now. Nothing is assumed, nothing is established. And somebody says, oh, well, you're not that smart. And you're like, well, I kind of thought I was sort of smart, or whatever it is. I mean, there is this potential attack, and kind of looking at it and going, okay, well, how can I connect with this person? How can that we're never really done. And I think that's a part of what you're talking about, I think, in this idea of micro resilience, in that it's like, that it is every moment.
we have gone pretty far afield, and there are a lot of resources in micro resilience, I think, to help us to have more energy, focus, and drive while we're in quarantine, while we're reading all this terrible news, and there's physical danger from the pandemic, as well as from protests and unrest and looters. And it's funny. It's really important to me too, I think, as an African American, to say that the protesters and the looters are, different people. If you're looting, you're not protesting, you're looting, So yeah, to not get hijacked by everything that's going on is a real challenge. And so the micro resilience resources can help you to have more energy, to stay strong in the midst of this. But then the other things we've been talking about too is just being able to be courageous and humble and be engaged with people who are different than us, to try to understand, and not just be passive, but to be an ally.
Exactly. Well, this is wonderful. We're gone a little bit over time, so I apologize that we've gone over time. But thank you for, because I think it's important. It's a great mindset for all of us to realize that it is an ongoing battle. That it's the idea of micro resilience with regard to ourselves, with regard to other people, with regard to our environment, with regard to our situation, and that it is each moment is going to be a significant moment, and can we try to master ourselves and try to find our best selves. So thank you so much. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you, Donna, for joining us as well. And and we will look forward to seeing everyone next Wednesday. Bonnie, you can come as a spectator if you'd like.
I would
next
love
Wednesday.
to. Yeah, put me on the list. I love it.
All right, let's do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for this great work you're doing. And this is what we all need to be doing, is just whatever we can to create powerful conversations that bring us together instead of pulling us apart. So thank you for the great work that you're doing, Chris, and for having me on the show.
It's been great fun. Thank you. Hope we didn't take too much of your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you all. I've got to get my workout in now, so I'll see you guys later.
All right. Bye, Chris.
Take care. Thank you all.